Welcome to the webinar series of the Happiness Movement.world. It's a movement founded by Tom, who's in the room. Tom, raise your hand, say hi, and by Jim, who's also in the room, and myself. And it's really a simple movement with a simple but so important mission. It's our mission with the Happiness Movement to contribute to a better world. And we do this by inspiring people and help them and support them to live their most beautiful lives. By addressing topics that really helps you to increase your awareness and consciousness. And one of the topics is feminine leadership. And today we are so happy to present to you the feminine leadership expert, Dalia Feldheim. So applause, even if you're on mute, just show some hands. Dalia, thank you so much for joining us. Please introduce yourself and let us know where you are.
It's lovely to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Dalia. I'm originally from Israel, but I've been around the world for the last 23 years in Geneva, Moscow, and I'm now in Singapore. So if you see the sunset, it's 5 o'clock here in the afternoon. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll tell you a little bit more as we proceed, but it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, thank you, Dalia. Well, the topic of today is feminine leadership, and you are really a feminine leadership entrepreneur and expert. My first question is maybe to the people in the room who, because I think there's so much knowledge also in the room. Let's first ask, if we are talking about feminine leadership, what are the elements of feminine leadership, or the topics? What is feminine leadership? What do you think? And let us know in the chat, please. What are your thoughts about feminine leadership? Or maybe what do you want to learn today during this webinar about feminine leadership? Use the chat to share this. And then we go back to Dalia.
Yeah, and I think the easiest way is just to put some elements that we don't write a letter about feminine leadership, but which are the elements for you in feminine leadership. Maybe later on we will discuss about the question that we had of one of our participants. About feminine leadership there. But maybe focus now on really topics, really elements, parts of feminine leadership. And most of I
see Eva and Ingrid, Ran, Pascal, Albert Jan saying totally the opposite of the masculine leadership. And then we have Pascal. Pascal is also one of our team members, and he is joining us from the train. And when he speaks about feminine leadership, he thinks about feminine energy. So it would be wonderful if you could share something about this. Well, presence, Wim. Listen first. Wow. Well, Dalia, maybe you can help us, because there are so many thoughts about feminine leaderships, and we can say it's like subjective, but maybe you can help us and give us a bit more information about it.
I absolutely love the answers, right? Because feminine leadership it's a provocation, because we don't think only females. We don't think leadership is one gender or the other. Leadership is genderless, but it's really connecting to traditionally considered softer skills. And I like to call it just leading from the heart, leading with compassion. And I have to say, I mean, when you look at the leadership world today, right, we're in a huge leadership crisis. We know that. I'm not talking politics. I'm not talking about the environment. I mean, we see it everywhere. If we're now talking about happiness at work, in the workplace, I mean, we see that we're in the midst of a major leadership crisis. I mean, we were all shocked with the report showing 87% of employees are unhappy in the workplace today, right? Only 13% are engaged. And when you think about it, even 20% of employees are so angry, they're hostile. They really feel that they work for a company that doesn't appreciate them as human beings. And, that's a huge crisis, because not only does it affect engagement, but it goes straight to the bottom line, right? I was reading reports around $7 trillion annually are spent on, related disease, etc. So it's very clear for us that the current leadership models are failing. And feminine leadership is around kind of relooking at the models, because our models may have been great for, the hunter, right? The warrior, even in the 80s, the industrial, efficiency. But in today's VUCA world, it's actually those more feminine traits that are more important versus ever before. And we see it kind of in research, and Harvard Business Review did a really interesting research in 2012. They tried to understand why there's not enough women in leadership roles. And they wanted to understand, women versus men in kind of leadership traits. And they found, and they wanted to show, and they found that women are as efficient, as good as men in leadership roles. And then they repeated this. So that was in 2012. They repeated it in 2019. And what they found is not only are women as good as men in leadership traits, they're actually better in 17 out of 19 traits. And those are the traditional one that we think about. So empathy, intuition, teamwork, compassion, etc. But also some of those like, operation under crisis, etc. So, the challenge that we need to talk about is we have this leadership crisis. We know that these feminine leadership traits seem to be more effective in dealing with the VUCA world. VUCA, I hope, it's the term for volatile, uncertain, complex, and filled with ambiguity. So we know that. Now, my point is, so why does lead like a girl or feminine leadership kind of still sound like weaker or, softer, etc.? And I think I love the comments from many of you. For me, when I say feminine leadership, it's about tilting, shifting where the world is today. And it's towards more feminine leadership, because the correct leadership is a balanced leadership. And, I shared with Asha and Jim before, a friend of mine, Nilima Bhatt, shared a model that helps really explain that. If you think about feminine versus masculine traits, right? So we have the traditional feminine traits, positive feminine traits, like empathy, intuition, even creativity, because, it's linked with birth and, teamwork, etc. Then on the other side, you have positive masculine traits. What would those be in your view? Positive masculine, just put in the chat whatever comes to mind for you when I say positive masculine traits. Logic, right? Solutions, determination, analysis, right? Process. Okay, those are the positive masculine. And I started off mental, action-driven, focus, direction, okay? Results, you could argue. So we have these kind of positive masculine, positive feminine. And a good leader is one that really floats between the two. And that's why, it's more around shifting the dynamics a little bit, because what we see is today in the world of leadership or the world of business, many sink into what I call wounded masculine. Wounded masculine is things like, scarcity mentality, right? Competition. When we think about power over people versus power with people. And the world today is in this kind of over masculine area. So when I say feminine leadership, it's about how can we both men and women connect to those more traditional feminine traits. Now, I do want to mention that there's also a wounded feminine, right? So when a feminine is attacked by a wounded masculine, you know, she too or he too can fall into wounded feminine. You know, what comes to mind when I say woman feminine in your view? So if the wounded masculine was around competition and power over, you know, wounded feminine would be traditionally what comes to your mind? Victimizing, yeah, feeling humiliated, dependability. And I think, you know, great answers. So I think that's the, you know, I just wanted us to have that perspective. And these are traditionally associated with, and there is some data around all of this. So it is proven by research that women sit with empathy longer than men. So for all the men out there, when your wife comes with an issue, right? It's shown in neuroscience that men listen, okay, they connect for a minute, but immediately a new area in their brain lights up, the area that is associated with solutions. Okay, while women stay with empathy slightly longer. And that was my tip for, you know, couple relationships. So men, when your wife comes and shares her issues, just shut up and listen. That's all she wants, right? We're too quick in jumping. I'm a masculine, I have a masculine trait in that sense, that when I see an issue, you know, I need to force myself to hold space before jumping into solutions. So the idea that I want to share here is the world has shifted into the wounded masculine. We need to balance it out with more feminine traits and avoid sinking into the wounded, both men and women. So, you know, I heard before this question came up, you know, before the model, why are so many women behaving like men? And I think that's when the world outside is, you know, you need to scream to be heard. If you're too empathetic, you are seen as weak. We see women as either falling into the wounded masculine, where they feel like they need to behave like men, okay, and misassociate assertiveness with aggressiveness. But we also see women fall into the wounded feminine, and I think that's an important, you know, distinction that I'll get back to when I tell you a little bit more about my story. But in, you know, in a big picture, my provocation when I say kind of lead like a girl or feminine leadership is really around balanced leadership. It's around rebalancing the world of leadership today towards inserting positive masculine and positive feminine. Being able to float between direction and clarity and logic and empathy, teamwork, and intuition. So that's kind of how I see feminine leadership, Asha.
And there I have my first question for you. A lot of female top managers are showing mainly their masculine side. Why is that?
Yeah, so I hear that a lot. What is wrong with women? Why aren't women getting to senior roles? And I must say that question ticks me out, because I think ticks me off. I think there's, you know, the challenge is in that dynamic. The challenge is that if you're not overshadowing the next person, you're not being heard. The challenge is, and I'm sure almost each one of you got a challenge once of, hey, you're too soft with your people. You're showing emotion in the workplace, that is a sign of weakness. So we get all these signals that, you know, emotions are weak, that, you know, in order to be heard, you need to overpower. And hence, you know, we jump into kind of the, what I called before, the wounded masculine. So I think that's where, when the business world, we will learn to respect the value that comes from bringing in more of the soft skills. And it's proven both in research, as I shared before, as well as in the world today, when as the business world will start respecting that, you know, women and men would start being proud of their more feminine traits, realizing that it's not weak to be good with your people. It's actually a determinator of a good leader. So I think that's kind of the dynamic. And if anyone, has any other points there, we'll get back into questions. But that's how I've seen it. So it's really around when we feel threatened, okay, instead of going into the positive masculine of assertiveness, of saying, sorry, I won't be accepted to be spoken like that, we jump over the positive masculine and jump straight into the wounded masculine, with becoming aggressive instead of assertive. So I hope I answered that a little bit.
Now you work for big companies, stock companies like Procter and Gamble. You were there a marketing executive. What kind of manager were you?
Well, yeah, so I started almost 23 years ago at Procter & Gamble, and I must say, the culture fit me like a glove. And I think Procter & Gamble as a company really believes in take care of your people, and the business takes care of itself. I very early was encouraged to bring my full self to work. And, from my first leader, and I'll tell you a little bit about him in a bit, but it was all around, being yourself and being good with your people. So I think I learned that lesson early on, and I tried to install the same with my people. So that you'll have to ask my people, but I learned very early on the value of compassionate leadership.
Uh-huh. Was there a link with your famous campaign? The campaign Like a Girl?
So yeah, so in 90, when I joined P&G, I actually joined on the feminine care business. And very early on, I became really passionate about women empowerment. So I'll tell you maybe a little bit about for those who don't know, it's called Run Like a Girl campaign that we did in 2014. So I was very blessed to be part of this campaign. Basically, it became, recently voted one of the top influencers campaign of the decade. But this campaign, basically, we started to understand, we wanted to reclaim the phrase like a girl from an insult to simply mean being yourself. Why? When you ask young girls, and we show this in the commercial, what it means to run like a girl, they would say, oh, it means run as fast as you can. But something changes during puberty. And when you ask teenagers, both girls and boys, as well as adults, suddenly like a girl becomes an insult. So that was kind of the role of the commercial, was to reclaim that phrase. And I must tell you, when I saw it, I teared up. When I showed it to my daughter, I teared up. It became, as I said, one of the most influential, 70 million views, etc. But what I'm most proud of, of course, as a marketing director, I was very proud of the business results. But what I'm most proud of, and I'll share with you an anecdote, is that 6 months ago, my youngest daughter, who's now 12, called me up from school all excited. Mom, you won't believe it, but they're showing your ad in social studies. So, more than a commercial, it became an icon for women empowerment. And I think, that was, for me, a huge kind of inspiration to then come and say, okay, now, if we take that analogy to the world of business, I spent the last 2 decades as a senior executive, and I believe it's time to reclaim that phrase like a girl once more, and this time in the world of leadership.
And your inspiration for that campaign, where did it come from?
Well, almost every woman that I met inspired that campaign. But maybe I'll tell you one story, actually. I moved to Singapore in 2010. In 2011, I went to India. Do we have anyone from India? No. Okay. But I immediately fell in love with the women of India. Okay. The commitment, basically commitment to deliver against all odds. And I'll just tell you the story because for me, that became the inspiration for this campaign. So we went into in-home visits. You know, when you do marketing campaign, you want to understand consumer habits. And we walk into this middle-class home in India. And I walk in with my agency and I see the girl that we came to speak with sitting on the floor. Okay, her mom comes in and she serves us food and drinks, and then she serves her daughter on the floor. I kind of sit there wondering what's going on. Aunts and uncle come into the house and they greet her and they greet the daughter on the floor. And for a moment, I saw the daughter's eyes, like something embarrassed look on her face as she was greeting, especially her uncles. So when we came out of the research of the in-home, I went to the agency and I said, well, what was that all about? And the agency said, well, she's on her period. And I said, so what? And she said, well, we in India believe that women on their periods are, you know, better isolated during those days. I mean, it started from a good intention, you know, to give women a rest, but we also believe that the bacteria and the menses, you know, we have all these myths that you can't go into the, you know, prayer area, and they don't actually sit with us. They sit on the floor during their period, they eat on the floor, and they also sleep on the floor. And then kind of jokingly, she said, yeah, we have all these crazy myths. We even believe that if you will touch a pickle, you'll make it go sour, right? Now I can tell you that night I didn't sleep. I just kept on thinking about that sad look on the girl's face, and you know how these myths maybe had a good intention, you know, in the olden days, but today we have sanitary protection, and you know, no girl should feel dirty during her period. So the next morning I called the agency and I told her, listen, how can we do something about this? And that's exactly, you know, where, you know, that girl's face couldn't kind of was stuck in my head. I don't feel that any girl should feel left behind. And so the agency lady said, yeah, you know, I'm also saddened by what we have, but you know, it's tradition, it's respect. And I said, listen, I'm a foreigner here. Let's try and see how we can address it in a respectful way. 12 months later, we came out with a campaign. It was a PR campaign called I Dared, I Touched the Pickle. And we used humor to basically say, it's a granddaughter saying to her grandma, hey, I dared, I wore white, I did sports, I went to school, you know, I touched the pickle. And I'm proud of a lot of things in my career, but the impact of that campaign, and it later evolved into keep girls at school, because girls during their period, you know, fall out of school for a week and then they fall behind. So that's kind of no girl left behind became then the inspiration for Like a Girl. As we were evolving the global campaign, we said, okay, we want to evolve now the global equity to focus from protection to a higher order benefit of women empowerment. But I think this, that was just a little bit the story of the inspiration for the campaign. But I think this campaign just really started a whole discussion on women empowerment. Again, it became the most viral ad in India, and there were TED Talks about it. You know, it won a Cannes Award for the Glass Ceiling Award, but it really started the conversation of women empowerment even before Me Too. And I guess that was my driving force in a way on then bringing back this question of why is Like a Girl an insult also in leadership?
Then later on, you made that TED talk, a talk about engaging and disengaging leadership. Can you share a little bit more about your experience there?
Sure. So, you know, that as I shared earlier, you know, I started off with P&G, 17 years in P&G. I describe I was in a state of flow. For those of you who know that term, it's really about meditation in action. It's when you're completely aligned with your purpose, right? My purpose was people empowerment. And as a marketing director, I was able to do campaigns like a Girl and be completely on purpose. But like all of us, right? You know, my career went from strength to strength, but it wasn't until I reached the lowest point that I really got my biggest lesson. And to understand that, I'll just share a little bit a story of contrast that I guess is the reason to why I'm here today. So very early on in my career, I want to share with you the good and the not so good, so you get the contrast. So very early in my career, maybe 6 months into it, was 1998, and I was called into my general manager because one of my launches, they hit a wall. And I'm sitting there in his office, and I'm starting, I was so frustrated. The reality is, and Ron will associate it, that my whole big launch that I was working for 6 months got stuck because my samples that I was planning to give out got stuck in the customs. Okay. So it was out of my control, super frustrating. And I'm sitting in my GM's office, so angry and frustrated that suddenly I started to tear. Okay. I'm in my general manager's office. He's 2 levels above me and I'm tearing up, right? What an embarrassment, right? I'm frantically trying to regain my composure. Now, my boss, his name is Jim. He's a friend and mentor until today. He offers me a box of tissues. And when I regain my composure, he says something to me that I'll forever remember. He said, Dalia, don't you ever be embarrassed for crying in the office again. It's a sign of your passion, and passion is your superpower. Wow, right? And then he added, and if you ever work for someone that doesn't appreciate that, walk away. They don't deserve you. Right? I was so empowered. And for the next 17 years in P&G, I had many managers. And that's the story, that kind of on compassionate leadership, of really allowing me to be who I am, understanding that my emotions are a sign of passion and not a weakness. And as a result, I just delivered the moon for these managers. And my career just went from strength to strength. But it wasn't until I reached the lowest point of my career that I realized the importance of leading with compassion, leading like yourself. And that happened 17 years later. So after 17 years, I left P&G and I became Chief Marketing Officer of another Fortune 500 company, head of Asia, huge role. I thought I found my dream role, right? 2 months into the role, I got a new manager, and how can I put it politely? Him and I were like fire and water, right? So I was all about, people and creativity, and he was all about numbers and results and scorecards and ROI. My favorite, ROI, right? Return on investment. We used to joke and say that it's ROI or you die. That was kind of the feeling, right? You get the picture. It was a match made in hell. So completely different mindsets. But, as a contrast, maybe 6 months into the role, suddenly I'm summoned into his office. And he's sitting there and giving me feedback. Now, I love feedback, right? I love tough love feedback. That's how you grow. But I can tell you there was no love in this feedback. It was just very personal, very berating. I mean, he told me, I'm not going to say what you're good at. It's a waste of time. I'm only going to focus on what you need to fix. And hey, there's no art in marketing. It's only science. You just didn't get it yet. No, you get the picture, right? And he's berating me and berating. And I'm now a C-suite woman, right? One of the only women in the team. So I'm keeping my composure. I'm holding it in. But then he moves to insult my team. And that's where I became a little bit of a lioness, because I knew how hard they were working on it. And I was so frustrated. When things are unfair, I become extremely frustrated. And when I get frustrated, I tear up. It's actually proven in science that men react to frustration with anger and women react with tears. Okay, there's a whole biological reason with that we can get into a little bit later, but I definitely live up to that research, and I started tearing up. Now he looked at me and he smiles and he offered me a box of tissue, and for a moment I have this warm fuzzy feeling, remembering my previous boss. But then, Jim, I noticed something weird in his smile as he turned around the tissue box, And on the other side of the tissue box was a handmade sticker he prepared in advance, which read Dalia's tissue box. Are you kidding me? I said with the little self-esteem I still had, and he's like, oh, come on. You know, I told him, this is an HR assault. He's like, come on, don't be so emotional, Dalia. It's just boy banter. I know you have a sense of humor. Right? So, you know, it became a game for him. You know, he was there berating me until I kind of burst into tears because he knew it would happen. And then he had this personal joke at my expense. But the reality is that despite all my success in P&G, at Procter & Gamble, suddenly, you know, I was constantly attacked. So all my strengths were not only appreciated, they were diminished. And I don't know if you ever heard it, but, you know, I was too good with my people. I was too positive. I was too energetic. I was too creative. Where's my process, right? So slowly, it started to get to me and I was losing my spark. But I wasn't raised to give up. I'm quite a resilient person, or at least I thought of myself as such. So I decided to, you know, persevere. So I can tell you, and I'll share with you a little bit the learning there, because first year I really tried to fight it, right? When you're attacked, your natural reaction is to fight back. And it's very normal. And the reality is I was just hitting the head against the wall. I was just wasting energy. You can't change someone that doesn't want to change. So in the second year, I kind of did like a flight, right? I tried to avoid, I tried to, you know, I said, okay, there's a lesson in here. Let me shut up and listen. Let me fix everything that he thinks that I need to fix. And I totally neglected my strengths and focused on my opportunity areas. And, you know, I can tell you, I hired a data scientist, etc. At the end of the year, my scorecard was exceptional. I delivered everything that I was expected to deliver, but I fell sick. I fell sick because I realized that I stepped away. I basically left my heart and my art, my creativity at the door. So third year, I said, you know, why am I fearing this situation? You know, I know what I'm good at. So I decided to go back, and, you know, he wanted science and I was determined to bring back my heart and my art into the workplace. So we created together with a team a campaign that was very creative, but also very data driven. And that ended up winning an Effie, which is an award for business results and creativity. And when that happened, I knew it was time to move on. But I can tell you, you know, that was quite a traumatic event. But I learned a very important lesson. I learned you know, to stop relying on external validation. And you remember that model that I shared with you before? So all my career, I was able to rotate between the positive feminine and the positive masculine. I was extremely result driven. I was extremely assertive. But when I was attacked in such a way, I sank into the wounded feminine. I spent my energy defending myself instead of, you know, like Muhammad Ali sometimes say, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. And that's kind of, you know, where we need to put our boundaries and saying, sorry, you know, going into our assertive. And that's exactly where, you know, feminine leadership is all about. It's not about all this soft, you know, touchy-feely world. Okay. And it's not sinking into the wounded feminine. It's being able. So that's why it's more feminine leadership, but it's a balance. It's a flexible leadership. It's a float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, being able to connect your positive feminine and your positive masculine. So I guess, you know, it was painful, but that's the reason I'm here today. I guess, you know, I'm now committed to turn that pain into purpose. Similar to you, Jim, right?
Yeah, I have a similar experience. Leading me to what I'm doing right now. Seeing the fear in people's eyes by firing them. That took me to my purpose, and that's bringing people to find happiness. And happiness at work is part of it. So that's mainly why we are now facing each other here. Now,
Loved your
feminine
story.
leadership, feminine leadership, the importance is clear for me, but how easy is it to implement it in your life, in your company? So how do you implement it? How do you do it?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, when I say feminine leadership, it's compassionate leadership, and it's about bringing your full self to work. It's about promoting psychological safety. So when I decided to leave that company, I actually took on a master's in organizational psychology in INSEAD, and I decided to specialize in psychological safety in the workplace. Psychological safety is a term coined by Kahn in 1990s, which basically means bringing your full self to work. You know, Amy Edmondson later made it her life mission to research psychological safety and its role. And she has proven that psychological safety is not a nice to have, it's actually a critical dimension, not only to get employee engagement that we talked about before, but to get things like innovation through a culture of learning. And if people don't feel that they can bring their full self to work, you know, if a leader is not compassionate and encouraging you to bring the full self to work, he will not get engagement, he will not get results, and he will not get learning, because people will be too scared to ask questions, to think out of the box, to share new ideas, etc. So, you know, the benefits of these more compassionate leadership are obvious. It's very clear that today more than ever, and you know, we know, I shared before the data on consumer engagement. Today with COVID, right? If we had, you know, such a level of anxiety and mental crisis before, today that's even more eminent. So when I left kind of I decided to pivot like you, Jim, and really focus on my purpose, which is helping individual and companies find, you know, purpose and joy at work. And, you know, learning through, you know, I studied positive psychology with Professor Tal Ben-Shahar from Harvard, and bringing all these learnings together, what happened to me, you know, what I learned about from INSEAD, I developed a very simple 5P model. And we have 5 minutes. So I actually want to share my screen, if that's okay, and very briefly talk about, okay, so you listened to, you know, why feminine leadership, why we need to focus on compassionate leadership at the workplace, why today more than ever, right? The mental health crisis, you know, employees are unhappy at work. We need more psychological safety to be able to get more engagement and innovation. This gets into the how. And the how, so I come from marketing. For those that know, there's a famous 5P model in marketing. So I decided to apply the same 5P or model of 5P that stands for 5 dimensions that are critical for compassionate leadership to get performance despite hardship, despite stress. Before I dive into each one of them and leave you just with some thoughts on what each one of you as a leader can do to become more compassionate, I'll just cover very briefly those 5P. And this is, you know, a model that is based on history, positive psychology, you know, everything from Buddhism to Judaism. There's critically 5 areas, right? The combination of mind, body, and soul. And the first thing I want you to think about, it's round because it's all around system thinking. The word health actually comes from the root hal, which means whole. You cannot be healthy and happy if you're not whole. Okay, Helen Keller said there's only one definition for happiness, and this is wholeness, right? So in that sense, I want you to think about it. You cannot be happy if you're not making progress against each one of these 5. And that's why when I go into companies sometimes and they talk, oh, we do happiness at work, we do resilience at work, we have yoga classes. And I'm a yoga teacher, so I love yoga. That's not, you know, enough. You really need to be addressing all 5. So the first P stands for purpose, spiritual growth. And that's all around strengths. So in my story, right, it was only when I was able to get back to my strengths that I was able to perform. So as a leader, how much time do you spend on working through strengths? And we know there's a lot of research around strength-based leadership. You know, it's all around setting goals. It's all around, you know, working towards a purpose at work. And that's one of my favorites workshop on find your why and link. I called it, Simon Sinek talks about the golden circle. I talk about the golden link, understanding your own purpose. Remember in my story, women empowerment, and linking it to my brand purpose and to the company purpose. So that's a very important workshop. Imagine what potential you will unleash as a leader if each of your employees were connected to their purpose. So that's the first P. The second P is around mental perseverance. This is about how we deal with hardship. This is, the growth mindset, the limiting beliefs that we have, right? In my story, I had a huge fear of failure and almost fear of criticism, right? And as a result, I was very reactive and defensive versus just saying, you don't need to open all the letters sent to you. Okay, understanding that this was kind of an extreme reality of feedback and how I dealt with it, not taking it as a personal failure. So all the area of personal and mental wellness, and I work with team in understanding their own limited belief and how we unlock them. The third and very important one is physical wellness. Actually, this model I created when I started teaching. So I teach today the science of happiness at Singapore Management University. It was actually one of my students that came up with the acronym as I was teaching around about the blue zones and what we know from the areas in the world where people live the longest. There's 5 key elements, and one of my students actually called it an acronym of Better Me, which is around breathing, mindfulness, eating, touch, recovery, which is around sleep, and then movement. So how do we teach kind of leaders to take care, and especially now during this COVID, right, when we're zoomed out of our mind, how do we encourage walking meeting? I have most of my meetings when I'm with earphones walking here in the green corridor in the jungle in Singapore. So what can we do and how important it is, right? And part of being compassionate leadership. The 4th P is around people and relationship, and here come Harvard's longest longitudinal research, 75 years, that most of you that are in the world of happiness would know. When you ask the number 1 most important dimension of happiness, the quality of our life is the quality of our relationships. So the number 1 dimension is relationships, and also the relationships at work, right? Gallup found that, having a best friend at work, or number 2, having good friends at work. So as a leader, what are you doing to promote that? And sorry, the last one is around perspective. This is around emotional wellness. This is around meeting your employees where they are, giving them the permission to be human. That's what my first boss did for me, and my second didn't. Permission to be, recognizing emotional, not fighting negative emotions, because we know you just intensify them, let them flow through you. So that's just kind of a little bit, and I talked about a few tips, and I'll just kind of leave you with that. But what can you as a leader, and that's kind of in my leadership workshop that I'm doing today with companies like Google and Netflix, etc. We're working through the whole understanding the model. What can you, because it starts with self-leadership, what can you do for yourself, and what can you do for your people? Really understanding, spending time understanding their strengths, helping them connect their work to their purpose. The mental perseverance, which we talked about, having a growth mindset, not fight with adversity, not flight with adversity, but dance with adversity. Imagine if you take the power of the punch and lead kind of the person in the whole idea of sumo, right? So how can you think more win-win? Physical perseverance, it's all about managing energy, not time these days. People is getting to know your employees and people. Today on Zoom, asking your employees, how are you feeling today? And really listening and letting them kind of share their ups and their downs, helping people connect, understand this importance of relationship at work. And finally, the importance of authenticity, vulnerability, this permission to be human, practicing empathy, and a big one that I haven't shared here is the importance of gratitude. And they did research to understand there's a lot of positive psychology interventions here that I mentioned, but Sonia Lubomirsky did research to understand which is most effective. And each one of these tools is extremely effective in alleviating stress and getting the best out of people. But 2 that I'll just, leave you with, The first one is connecting to your strengths and bringing them to work every day. And the second one is really sharing gratitude. Because when we appreciate, this is Tal Ben Shahal's quote, when we appreciate the good things in our life, the good in our life appreciates, increase in value. So that's a little bit on kind of the course. I mean, I can share, these are some of the modules that I go through. But yeah, I'll just leave you with this, which is the paraphrase on Sheryl Sandberg, you know, where I want every little girl and boy who are told that they are emotional to be told instead that emotions are a sign of passion, and that passion is their superpower. So that's a little bit for me about feminine leadership, and I'd love to take questions.
Yeah, maybe
Wow.
maybe just before Asha takes over. Now you are here. You're very busy, and you know you're training Google, Facebook, Netflix, and so on. But maybe I have one small question for you. Could you do us a favor with our academy we are creating now with the happiness movement? So do you have time for us to do something in our academy?
Well, thank you, Jim. That's a great honor. I mean, I decided to, when people ask me, how did you shift from such a great career? And, you know, I'll tell you, my moment of shift is when I spoke with my students, and one of them said, oh, we talked about purpose. And he said, oh, I'm going to be a corporate slave for a few years, and then I'll do what I want. And that gave me goosebumps, right? Because you're laughing, Tom, right? Because I know that it doesn't have to be that way, right? And I have the experience of both, you know, what happens when you unleash the best and what happens when you limit. Because in this second environment, they thought I delivered, but I know I gave 15%. So Jim, I will be honored. You know, that's why I'm on a mission today to really work with as many companies, as many individuals. I mean, the principles are simple. And sometimes I say it's not rocket science. It is science, the science of positive psychology. It's grounded in years and years of research, but it's great news because we can teach ourselves to be more resilient and happy. So I am as passionate about as you, Jim, in just sharing that as broad as possible, because if each one of us would address, and I can see what a change it made in my life when I was able to focus on my strengths, when I was able to step up, you know, and recognize the challenge was just an opportunity for growth. What happens if we unleash kind of the full potential? So would love to. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. And then now back to Asha in her holiday house. Isn't it, Asha?
Yes, indeed. I'm in a holiday park, and to be honest, that's not something that I really like, but it's good for the children, right? So, well, thank you, Dalia, for this great opportunity to meet you and to listen to your story and learn so much. It was really inspiring, and I love the way that you use the wisdom and the science, but also your personal experience, because I think from personal experience we learn the most, right? We can read a book, we can read the science, but when people share personal stories, it really stuck with us. That's how I feel. So thank you for sharing your personal stories with us. There are some questions in the chat, and if you have questions, please put them in the chat so we can ask Dalia to answer them. Let me see. Well,
I love this. Do you expect to see more crying in the office?
Yes, exactly.
That's a great one. Maybe I'll take that first, Asha.
Yes, let's take it.
I think it's just a funny anecdote that I mean, I'm working in Asia now, and if there's one area that is the most extreme with dealing with emotions, it's Asia, right? You're bred that you don't share negative emotions. Absolutely not acceptable. And I think there's a lot of science that shows that when you suppress emotions, they end up coming in the weakest kind of area. And so there's a lot of explanation, and there's a whole model on emotional intelligence, and I call it emotional bravery, which goes beyond recognizing emotions in yourself and others, but bravery to really accept the whole range of emotions and to center your emotions before you act. So I don't expect, and I also say, I easily tear up, and I will never, doesn't make me weak in any way. I never felt myself weak in any way because of it. And if others people see it as a weakness, it's their problem. So I don't apologize. I just say, sorry, you triggered me, or this triggered me. I need a moment. Let's continue this discussion tomorrow. And, in a sense that I really do believe that emotions are, and there was a great, emotions are energy in motion. Emotions are just a link into your soul. They are an alarm bell that something is going on. And I can tell you the most rewarding experience after sharing my TED Talk called Dare to Lead Like a Girl was that one guy called me. Actually, I had two crazy responses. One guy called me and said, you know what? I never knew how to react when someone started to cry in the office. And I saw your TED Talk, and it happened that the next day, my favorite employee started crying in the office. And before I would get all embarrassed and not know what to answer, but now I had a great answer. I said, wow, I see you're really passionate about it. How can I help? That's the only acceptable reaction. It's a sign of your passion. I see that you're passionate. I triggered something. How can I help? So I hope to see more crying in the office from both women and the poor men. And that's the other reaction that I've been getting. Actually, 60% of the comments were from men saying, thank you. We're fed up of the male toxicity that is locking us, that, we keep on saying, oh, men don't cry, and stop being such a wimp, and you're too weak. Men are actually as excited about leading like a girl, right? Because it's allowing us to be authentically us. And we know that, this kind of authenticity creates relationships, create, a linkage. So I think, I would love to see more crying in the office. I never say it's not about everyday crying in the office, right? But it's around, centering your emotion and accepting them as part of, a natural expression of relief, of frustration, of sadness, etc. So it would be interesting to see what happens.
Well, in that case, I think it's good to share your TEDx talk with the audience. So if there is more crying at the office, people will know how to react on this. So let's share your TED talk with all the people who are watching or registered.
And if it resonates with you, A, I would love to hear, and B, please do feel free to pay it forward, where I think the more we make it just kind of acceptable, the easier it would be for all of us.
Perfect. I have also a question, Dalia, like, for example, when you speak about feminine leadership or compassionate leadership, especially when you're a woman yourself, people think that you're like this activist, like we can do it. How do you deal with people who are calling you an activist, or maybe you are an activist?
That's a very important, I do think there should be more women in leadership roles, okay? Because I think it's good for both male and women. I don't believe in promoting a woman because she's a woman. Absolutely not. That hampers women more than anything. The best person for the role needs to be promoted. But, I really do believe that leadership is genderless. My best leaders were male. My best mentors today are men that are connected to their hearts. So my point is not, it would be a by-side that the more we have equal women to men, the more we make more feminine traits like empathy and compassionate leadership prominent in the workplace. That's my only objective, to really make sure that, what's the role of business, right? To grow business. And you can only grow business when you have passionate, empowered employees And you only have passionate, empowered employees when you are able to bring your compassion to work so that they can bring their full self to work. So, I am happy to see more women, but that's not my core goal. My core goal is to bring more compassionate leaders. And I say it very bluntly, and I talk a lot in HR forums. It's very simple. Every manager, two things. There's a huge difference between a manager and a leader. And too many companies do not understand that. So before moving from manager to leader, companies need to invest in leadership, because a leader is only a leader if he has people who follow him. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of number one. Invest in leadership training before you promote people to be people leadership. That's number one. And number two, which is so simple, that you cannot promote, you need to be evaluating people on business results and on leadership results, people results. And you cannot promote someone unless he's top rated in both areas. That's it. Basta. Simple. Right? If they're great results, but it's at the expense of people, they shouldn't be promoted to senior levels.
Yes, so true. So I see a great question of Albert-Jan Slomp. Albert-Jan, are you still in the room? Let me see. Yes, I see you. Let's unmute yourself, and so you can ask your question directly to Dalia.
Dalia, thanks for your presentation. It was really wonderful to have you in this webinar. Question, which relates to the leadership crisis we are in, as you said before. What do you think, what's the best way going forward? Should we change the system from inside out, or can we change the system from outside in? What do you think?
Oh, that's such a great question. I believe in the magic of the and, they're from good for great. So it's not an either or. I think we need to do both. From the outside in is putting the systems in place, like I was talking about, that you can't promote a leader unless he's good with people. So there's a lot that can be done from the expectations of a leader, the definition that we reframe the word leadership, that it has to include soft skills. Okay, actually Google did a research and found that that's the #1 driver of teamwork, psychological safety. So it has to be done from the outside in, but it also has to be done from the inside out, where we as leaders, men and women, stop thinking that lead like a girl is an insult, and start thinking that connecting to our feminine traits is a strength. And maybe just, we're up to time, and I'll just share one thing. My ex-boss, Paul Polman, who was the ex-CEO of Unilever, as you know, right? He, after my TED Talks, I was not connected, but he's a great mentor of mine. He quoted and said, courage is the most misunderstood concept. Okay, many perceived courage to mean making decisions that others don't. But courage, and many of you are French speaking, it comes from the word cœur, heart in French, because the real courageous leaders are those who lead from the heart.
Yes, thank you. Well, it's noon. We are on time. And maybe I want to end, because you're speaking about those leaders the real leaders who lead from the heart. Let's end this with, maybe you can share some role models, like who are the leaders, the people with their feminine and masculine traits in check, and other like public people, like for me, I think like someone like maybe Gandhi or Nelson Mandela. Those leaders, they have, I think, the masculine and the feminine elements in check. But maybe, yeah, you can share your role models.
Honestly, I would love that I want to be respectful of people's time, so I'll share in 1 minute, but I'd love you guys to share, because that's my next thing of really understanding that. My first manager, Jim, was definitely a role model. Okay, he's still a great people leader. He was very decisive, and the tough love is a great image, okay, because it's about being tough and being loving. I'm fascinated by Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand. And she has been quoted to say that, people criticize me for being too empathetic. And I think empathy is not a weakness, it's a strength. So when I saw that, it's exactly on my topic. But I'd love to hear more from you, because I think that's what we need to promote, and just I touched on Jacinda, I would say, the crisis just even brought, and Paul Polman talks about it, 7 out of the 9, successful countries led by women. There's something there that instead of criticizing women, we need to learn from them, as well as from men. Most of the successful men are able to balance the two out. So it's really just about kind of being brave. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's about linking in, facing our fears straight on, linking into our superpowers, and then stepping up to the challenge. So I'd love to continue the conversation on LinkedIn. Please do stay in touch. And yeah, Jim, thanks for the invite. Happy to come back.
Thank you. We are very grateful for your time and for what will happen in the future. So let's cooperate to bring this feminine leadership to the world, and to make it a better place. So I would like to thank everybody attending today, and we keep in touch. Asha?
Would love to hear any thoughts that you have on LinkedIn or any other form.
Perfect. Thank you, Dalia. Thank you, all the people who are with us in this Zoom room. Sarah, Tom, Albert, Lisette, Wim, Pascal, who's from the train, and all the people that I don't know personally. Thank you so much for joining us. We are recording this, so you will all get the recordings. Dalia told us that she also will share her presentation. So everything that is on the slide, you will also get it. And we will share, Dalia, her TED Talk. And we can't wait to get her program into the Academy. Watch us while we are preparing to launch the Academy next year. And yeah, it would be wonderful to have your program also in our Academy. And thank you all again for your time. See you next month for our next webinar. And hope that you are going to join us as well. Thank you and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.